Midlife doesn't always arrive with a clear signal. It's not always a crisis. Sometimes it's just this. Something that used to work doesn't feel right anymore. The life you've built, even if it's a good one, doesn't quite fit the same way. And you can't go back, but you don't know what's next. It's the third quarter. There's an old story that's passed down through multiple Native American traditions. You can find this in the traditions of various tribes. And it begins with this idea. First time I ever heard it was from the mythologist Michael Meade. The story goes that in the early days of the world, Meade says, back in the first days, people began to get sick. Everything had been fine. Everybody had been happy. And then all of a sudden, people in the community began to feel bad. And not just physically, even their dreams, in their spirits, in their sense of how to live. They just had all these questions, and they just felt generally sick. Not everybody, but several of the people in the community, and no one knew what to do. So there's this small group of people in the community, and they did something unusual. They left the safety of the village. Nobody had ever done that before. Everybody stayed together. Who knows what's out there? They're wild animals. They hear the noise. There's all the darkness. And so people had always stayed in the safety of the village. But this one group said, let's go out and let's figure out what is out there. So they went out to the edge of the darkness. They didn't turn away. They didn't try to fix anything. They didn't even understand what they were doing or what they were going to face out there. They just went out there and they just stayed, waiting at the edge of the darkness. And over time, something began to happen. These songs started coming to them. They didn't know exactly what was going on, but there was this music, and they came to them. And the first night they went back to the community and they told people a little bit about it, and they said, wait, what? There's music coming? And they said, yeah, it's hard to explain. And they went back the next night, came back to the community, and people kept saying, well, what do you mean the music's is it coming from outside over there, or is it coming from within you? And the answer was yes, both and. It was as if something was speaking through the darkness and through them at the same time. As if the force behind everything was delivering the song from the outside while also inspiring it from within. Well, eventually the music became so compelling that these people said, all right, we know what to do now. And they went back to the community and they brought the people who were sick into the center of the community. They didn't take them out to the edge, not out into the dark, but they brought them into the middle of the village where everybody could gather around them. And you know what they did? They sang. They sang those songs that had come to them. And sure enough, slowly, the sick were healed. And they could rejoin the dance of life. And something else happened too. The healing of the few brought renewed vitality to everyone. From that point on, whenever anybody got sick or they lost their way or there were big relational issues, anything like that, this was what the community did. They gathered. They sang. And this was the beginning of healing ceremonies. Now, what strikes me about that story isn't just the healing. It's also what happens before it. Those people didn't rush in with answers. They also didn't avoid the darkness. They didn't try to get through it as quickly as possible. They went to the edge, to what they didn't understand, and they stayed there long enough for something to come to them. Now, that's not usually how we think about solving a problem. We've lived most of our lives, during the second part of life, the second quarter of life, that's what we did. We came up with strategies and we worked hard to find answers and we were going to fix stuff. That's kind of second quarter business. That's what we did. And that's how most of us have lived for a long time now. But as we move through adulthood, there comes a point, often somewhere in the middle of life, when the old way of navigating stops working in the same way. That all of that striving for the certain kind of achievements and so forth, it just doesn't work the same way. Not because you failed, and not because something's gone wrong. It's just that you've arrived somewhere where, the way I always say it is, it's where the maps, the old maps aren't working anymore. They're not showing you where you're going the way they used to. That's where I am. People ask me, do you like being an English professor? And I always say, for 20 years it was a calling. I mean, that was who I was in a deep, deep way. I would have done it if they didn't pay me. I would go teach those classes. Now, it's a job I like. I like it a lot. I'm grateful to have a job I like. But it's not quite the same thing it always was. Now I've got to figure out what my relationship to that job is. The maps don't work the same way. The roles that once gave you shape don't hold the same way. The goals that once pulled you forward don't carry the same energy. And then what you're left with, here's what gets tough. It's not like you're given a new direction. It's more like you're standing in this open field at dusk and the light is going and you're waiting for your eyes to adjust. And the instinct, if you're like me, if you're like most of us who have lived through our second quarter, the instinct is to go do something, freaking figure it out, get back to solid ground. But this story, it suggests that there are moments in life where the work isn't to solve the problem. That's not even the job. It's just to remain there, just outside the darkness, and to listen. Because meaning in this part of life, it doesn't usually arrive as a plan. It's not strategies. It's not engineering things to make life work. Meaning arrives more like something you just wait and begin to hear. Maybe it's faint at first and easy to miss, but if you stay with it, something can start to take shape. And then there's one more movement in the story, and I think this is really important and we shouldn't miss it. Those people, the ones who heard the songs, they didn't stay out at the edge forever. They came back. And the healing didn't happen out there in the dark. Where did it happen? In community. What they received wasn't just for them. It became something they carried back. That music was something they brought back and offered. And that might be one of the most important shifts in the second half of life. That what you've begun to understand in your own third quarter, what started to take shape for you as you think about who you are, what you want, where you want to go, it's not just about your own clarity. It becomes part of how you show up, how you relate to others, what you give and offer. The songs, in other words, don't belong only to the singers. They belong to everyone. So I'll close with this. When we feel a bit lost, or we're faced with those big and small questions, the 3 I's is what I call them: identity, inclination, and intention. Who we are, what we want, where we're going. When we're faced with that, maybe our question shouldn't be, how do I get through this time of lostness, of disorientation? Maybe the question is just, what am I being asked to listen for right now? And eventually, what might I be able to carry back to others once I hear a song? Because in that story, healing doesn't begin when the darkness disappears. It begins when someone is willing to stand at its edge long enough to hear something and then bring it back to the center. Thanks, y'all.